By the end of August, the grass on Norah Bell's Oklahoma ranch had stopped looking dead and started looking erased. The ground was cracked into hard gray plates. Dust sat on the fence rails. Even the wind seemed tired. It moved across the pasture without bending much of anything, because there was almost nothing left to bend. At noon, a flatbed truck came rattling down the county road, carrying rolls of electric netting, steel posts, 2 water tanks, and a solar fence charger. Earl Pritchard shut off his tractor across the road and watched Norah sign the delivery slip. "Tell me that's not your hay money," he called. Norah did not answer. Behind her, 18 beef cows stood near an empty hay ring. Their ribs were beginning to show. In the next pen, 34 goats pressed their noses through the wire, reaching for a few dry leaves on the far side. The driver looked past the barn toward the 80-acre lease Norah had taken on the west side of the property. It was rough ground. Mesquite, greenbrier, ragweed, sumac, and waist-high brush covered most of it. The last owner had stopped running cattle there years ago. "You putting cows in that?" the driver asked. "Cows and goats," Norah said. Earl laughed. "Those cows can't eat thorns." Norah looked at the goats. Mabel, the oldest doe in the herd, had already found a gap in the gate and was stretching her neck toward a mesquite branch. "No," Norah said, "but the goats can." By sunset, the electric fencing was stacked beside the barn, the water tanks were empty, and the last of Norah's emergency money was gone. Everyone in the county knew she could have spent it on hay. What they did not know was that Norah had not bought feed. She had bought access to 80 acres everyone else had written off, and she had bought herself time. 3 days earlier, Norah had sat across from Wade Mercer in the back room of the county feed store. Wade sold hay, hauled water, and carried loan papers in the same leather case as his price sheets. He had known Norah since she was a child. That did not stop him from setting a contract in front of her. "This gets you through winter," he said. "Enough hay for the cows and the goats. No payment until after calving." Norah read the first page. The price was bad. The interest was worse. The security clause listed her breeding cows by number. Wade leaned back in his chair. "You can't feed cattle on hope." "No," Norah said, "but I'm not putting June and the other cows under a loan I may not be able to pay." "Then sell the goats." Norah looked through the dusty window. A line of ranch trucks waited at the loading dock. Everyone was buying the same thing from the same shrinking supply. "The goats aren't the problem," she said. Wade smiled. "Their mouths. They're different mouths." That morning, Norah had visited Amos Reed, an 81-year-old widower who owned the brush-covered tract beside her ranch. Amos had tried cattle on it once. The cows picked at the open grass and left the brush alone. Within a few years, the mesquite and vines had closed in. Norah walked the fence line slowly. Beneath the brush, she saw patches of dry bluestem, grama, and old native grass. Not enough for cattle to live on by themselves. But the brush carried leaves. The vines carried growth. The weeds still held seed heads. The land did not contain one kind of feed. It contained layers. Norah offered Amos a small lease payment and promised to repair the fences. Then she called the farm supply store and ordered portable electric netting, posts, and water tanks. When Wade heard, he called it betting the ranch on brush. "No," Norah said, "I'm trying not to bet it on one truckload of hay." The next morning, before the heat climbed, Norah built the first test paddock. It was small, only a few acres, with a narrow lane back to water. She checked the fence voltage twice. Then she opened the goat gate. The goats did not hesitate. They moved into the brush like water finding cracks. Some stood on their hind legs to pull leaves from low branches. Others stripped greenbrier and ragweed. Mabel went straight to a mesquite shrub and began eating the tender ends. Norah did not leave them there all day. After 4 hours, she brought them out and walked the paddock. The brush line looked thinner. Small pockets of grass had appeared where the goats had pulled vines away. Then Norah opened the cattle gate. June, the oldest cow in the herd, stopped at the entrance. She smelled the ground, looked at the brush, and took one step inside. The other cows waited. June lowered her head and began pulling at a strip of dry grass the goats had exposed. Within a minute, the herd followed. Norah stood by the fence with a notebook in her hand. She recorded the time the cows entered, how quickly they settled, how much water they drank, and how many were chewing cud by late afternoon. The result was small. The cows had not discovered a hidden meadow. The goats had not turned brush into hay, but both groups had eaten without competing for exactly the same plants. That night, June lay beneath the barn chewing steadily. Mabel did the same in the goat pen. Norah wrote one sentence at the bottom of the page. 2 species, 2 feeding layers, 1 piece of ground. For the first time in weeks, the idea felt less like desperation and more like a test she could repeat. 2 weeks later, the last green patch in Norah's home pasture disappeared. Hay prices rose on Monday. They rose again on Friday. One neighbor sold 6 cows. Another sold his entire goat herd before the auction market dropped any further. Norah kept moving her animals through the leased ground. At first, she sent the goats in ahead of the cattle. They opened paths through the brush, ate vines, and knocked leaves within reach. The cattle followed and used the grass beneath. But the system was not as simple as goats first, cows second. Some paddocks held more browse than grass. Others held more grass than browse. The goats drank less than the cows, but they crowded the mineral feeder. The cattle could flatten fencing if the voltage dropped. A broken water line could turn a good paddock into a trap before noon. One afternoon, Wade stopped without being invited. He looked at the goats working through a wall of greenbrier, while the cows grazed an open strip behind them. "Looks busy," he said. Busy isn't the same as fed. How long will it last? Norah looked at the map clipped to the fence. She had divided the 80 acres into temporary paddocks, but the numbers changed every time she walked the ground. "I don't know yet." Wade tapped the leather case under his arm. "Hay is something you can count. So is debt." After he left, Norah pulled her mother's old ranch ledger from a cedar drawer. The book contained calving dates, rainfall totals, vaccination notes, and records from the drought of 1998. Norah had read those pages many times, but she had always looked for a recipe. Her mother had written things like, "Move before second bite," "Cows taking grass too low," "Goats reaching but not filling," "Add hay tonight," "Water clean, intake normal." Do not confuse a full pasture with a balanced ration. Her mother had never asked one pasture to do every job. She had used rough ground, hay, crop residue, brush, minerals, and rest. When one part weakened, she shifted pressure to another. Norah copied the lesson into her own notebook. The goats do not replace the cows. The brush does not replace the grass. The lease does not replace hay. Each part only has to carry part of the load. It was also the idea Norah ignored on the hottest week of September. By then, her haystack had dropped below 20 bales. The well pump coughed air before it caught. The weather radio predicted 7 more days above 100 degrees. Norah had one paddock with more feed than the others. The goats had eaten most of the greenbrier, but plenty of mesquite leaves remained. The cattle had used the open grass without taking it all the way down. According to Norah's plan, both groups should have moved the next morning. She left them 2 more days. The goats went back to the same shrubs and stripped the lower branches. The cows returned to the best grass and took another bite. The second day changed the paddock. By noon, the shaded ground beneath the brush was exposed. The cattle were grazing close to the dirt. The goats were reaching higher, standing against branches and fighting for the last leaves. Water use jumped. Norah offered hay, but several cows walked past it to search the paddock for the short grass they had already eaten. Two young goats developed loose manure after crowding the mineral tub and consuming more supplement than usual. She had not created more feed. She had only delayed moving until the animals began eating the future. Before sunrise, she opened the lane and pushed both groups into a fresh paddock. Then she carried hay to the cattle, set rough forage for the goats, scrubbed the water tank, and watched until June began chewing cud. From the fence line, Norah could see bare soil, where grass crowns had been bitten twice. The goats had removed enough leaf cover to expose the ground to full sun. Earl walked over and leaned on the gate. "Thought your system was working." "It was," Norah said. "What happened?" "I stayed too long." Earl looked at the damaged ground. "So the brush ran out." "No, my time ran out, and I pretended it hadn't." That night, Norah recorded everything. The extra days, the water increase, June's behavior, Mabel's condition, the bare soil. She did not soften a single line. At the bottom of the page, she wrote the rule that would guide every move after that. The secret is not having two species. The secret is sequence, pressure, and timing. After the failure, every gate opening followed an order. If the browse was strong and the grass was hidden, goats entered ahead of the cattle. If the grass was exposed and the brush was thin, the cattle entered first, or the two groups used separate sections. No group stayed simply because feed remained somewhere inside the fence. Norah moved them when the best plants had been used once, before the animals came back for a second bite. She placed cattle mineral where the goats could not reach it, and goat mineral where the cows could not crowd it. She tested water twice a day. She checked shade. She watched June and Mabel before she trusted any number in her notebook. Within 10 days, the ranch found a rhythm. Goats opened the brush. Cattle used the grass. Hay filled the gaps. Water and minerals stayed constant. The land rested after both groups left. On the barn wall, Norah wrote the number of usable paddocks remaining. 12. Then 10. Then 8. Then 6. Each number was not just land. It was days. The drought turned the whole ranch into a countdown. When only 4 paddocks remained, Wade stopped again. "Still think you can make winter?" "I think I can make the next move." "That's not the same thing." "No," Norah said. "But it's the only thing the animals can eat today." Wade did not smile. 3 ranches south of Norah had already sold most of their breeding cows. One man had abandoned a leased pasture after his well failed. Wade had customers who owed more than their remaining cattle were worth. He looked at Norah's cows. They were lean, but they walked steadily. The goats were thinner too, but their eyes were clear. "You got lucky with that brush," he said. Norah looked at the 6 scratched-out numbers on the barn wall. "No," she said, "I got careful." That afternoon, the western horizon disappeared. A brown wall rose higher and began swallowing fence posts. "Storm!" Earl shouted from across the road. The wind hit before Norah reached the first paddock. Dust slammed into the cattle. The cows turned away from it and pushed toward the corner. The electric netting snapped loose from 2 posts. The solar charger tipped over. Norah ran for the lane gate, but a water tank rolled onto its side and tore the hose free. The cattle broke through first. June crossed into the next paddock, and the herd followed. The goats scattered through the opening behind them, rushing into the brush Norah had saved for the following week. There was only wind, dust, loose animals, and Norah trying to keep 18 cows from reaching the county road. When the storm finally passed, the ranch looked rearranged. The water lane was buried. 3 fence sections were down. 1 tank was cracked. Two planned paddocks had been grazed together, and the goats had stripped the softest browse from a third. Nearly 3 days of feed were gone in one afternoon. Norah stood beside the broken tank, with dirt in her teeth and blood on one palm. Headlights appeared at the gate after dark. Wade drove in, pulling a trailer of hay. Norah stared at it. She could smell the hay from 20 feet away. Dry grass, dust, safety. Wade opened his case and set a contract on the truck hood. The price went up. I figured. So did the interest. Norah read the first page. Norah read the first page. Then the second. Behind the barn, June called once. Mabel answered from the goat pen. Wade held out a pen. "No shame in changing your mind," he said. Norah took it. For a few seconds, she imagined the hay stacked under the roof. She imagined full feeders, quiet cattle, and one night of sleep without counting paddocks. Then she read the security clause again. "I need until morning. By morning, this load may belong to somebody else." "I know." Wade left the contract on the hood and drove away with the hay. At dawn, a county truck pulled into the yard. Dr. Lena Ortiz stepped out wearing dusty boots and carrying a clipboard. Norah had called her after the overgrazing mistake. The storm had delayed the visit. Lena asked to see the notebook before she asked to see the animals. She read the water records, paddock maps, hay use, manure notes, and the page where Norah had written down her failure. "You recorded the bad days," Lena said. "They happened. Most people only write down the parts that make an idea look good." Lena examined June, then several younger cows. She checked Mabel and the goat kids. She walked the damaged paddock and looked at the remaining forage. "They've lost condition," she said. Norah looked down. "But not as much as I expected." Lena warned her that browse could not replace enough effective fiber for the cattle. Hay still mattered. Clean water remained non-negotiable. The goats could not be allowed to strip every woody plant. The land needed recovery time the drought might not give it. Then Lena tapped the notebook. What kept these animals going wasn't cows and goats sharing a fence. It was you watching the whole system. That afternoon, Wade returned for the contract. Norah handed it back unsigned. He looked at the patched fencing and the animals rising as she opened the lane. "You're still willing to gamble on this?" "No," Norah said. "I'm relying on what they've already shown me." The final paddock lasted less than Norah hoped. The goats entered first and worked the edge. The cattle followed into the open center. Norah moved them before either group came back for a second bite. After that, the leased ground was finished. Not dead, not ruined. Finished for the season. Norah fed the last hay in smaller portions. She cut safe branches from the far fence line for the goats. She hauled water before sunrise. She checked June and Mabel twice a day. On the 10th afternoon, a drop of water hit the dust beside Norah's boot. Then another struck the barn roof. Rain moved across the ranch in a thin silver sheet. It did not refill the well that day. It did not turn the pasture green. It did not erase the bare spots Norah had created when she stayed too long. But it settled the dust. And for the first time in months, the ranch smelled like soil again. All 18 cows were still behind Norah's fence. All 34 goats were still there too. The following spring, green returned unevenly. The damaged paddock came back slowest. Norah marked it on the map and rested it longer. Wade returned later that week without a hay trailer or a contract. He stood at the fence while the goats worked through a strip of brush and the cattle grazed behind them. "I've been hearing stories," he said. "People say the goats saved your cows. People like simple stories. What did you actually do?" "I measured. I moved them. I made a mistake and wrote it down." "Could someone else copy it?" "Not by copying one number. Different land, different animals, different water, different heat." She handed him several pages from her notebook, warning signs, water checks, forage notes, and the questions she asked before every move. "You can share those," she said, "but don't call it a formula." "What should I call it?" Norah watched June lower her head to the grass, while Mabel reached into a wall of leaves above her, paying attention. Years later, people still told the story of the woman who put cattle on a dead pasture and turned goats loose in the thorns. But the cattle and goats were never the miracle. The miracle was that Norah learned to see one piece of land as more than one kind of feed. She learned that cattle could use what goats left open. Goats could use what cattle passed by, and neither species could be asked to carry the whole ranch alone. The drought did not end because she found a trick. The ranch survived because she built a system that could bend without breaking. And because she finally understood the one rule the land had been trying to teach her all along: use what is there, leave enough for tomorrow, and move before hunger makes the decision for you.